So proceeding on to the first question, which quantity has the fundamental SI units of kg meter inverse second minus 2, right? So that means energy. If I take energy, okay, take any form of energy. I am taking over here gravitational potential energy, which is equal to your mgh, right? So that means what is the unit of m unit is kg, right? What is the unit of g is acceleration due to gravity, right, which is equal to meter second minus 2, right? And what is h unit is meter, right? So that means over here what will be the total unit? So this will be equal to your kg meter square second minus 2. Does it match? No. So that means the correct option, so that means option number A is wrong, right? Now comes force. What is force? Force is equal to your mass into acceleration, right? What is mass? Mass is kg. So what is the unit of acceleration? Acceleration unit is meter second minus 2, right? So that means the net unit of force is equal to your kg meter second minus 2. Does it match? No. So option number B is also incorrect, right? Now coming to C, that is momentum. Momentum P is equal to your mass into velocity, right? So that means what is the unit of mass? The unit of mass is your kg, right? What is the unit of velocity? Meter per second, right? Meter second inverse. So this will be equal to your kg meter second inverse, right? So that means does it match? No. So that means option number C is also incorrect. Now coming to option number D. Now coming to your pressure, okay, P naught pressure. So this is equal to your force per unit area, right? What is force? We calculated this. So this will be equal to kg meter second minus 2. What is the unit of area? Meter square, right? Length into breadth. So this will be equal to your kg meter inverse second minus 2. Now does it match? Yes, it matches. So the correct option to your question number 1 will be option number D, pressure. I hope you got the question. So proceeding on to the next question, that is your question number 2. An object is held in equilibrium by three forces, magnitude F, G and H, okay, that act at a point in the same plane. Okay, so there are three forces F, G and H which acts on this point. Okay, the three equations for these forces are 1, 2 and 3. So we have to figure out which of the equations are correct. So that means if the three forces are in equilibrium, I can write that summation of net forces along x-axis should be equal to your 0, and summation of net forces along y-axis, this should be equal to your 0 also, right? So taking this as the x-axis and this as the y-axis, right? So that means over here if I just make a component of F along the x-axis, what is the component of F along the x-axis? So this will be equal to your F cos theta, right? And what is the component of F along the y-axis? So this will be equal to your F sin theta, right? So that means over here the net figure reduces to G in this direction, okay, H in this direction. Okay, now the force F is replaced by its component, right? So when I'll add up these two components, we'll get the net force, right? So that means we are replacing the force F with its component. Okay, so that means over here will be our F sin theta, right? And over here will be our what? F cos theta. Very good. Okay, so the summation of net force along x-axis should be 0, right? So if the net force along the x-axis should be 0, so that means this force should be equal to this force, right? So that means F cos theta should be equal to G. Why these forces should be equal? So that they cancel each other and in the x-axis we don't get any force, right? So that means F cos theta should be equal to G, and the summation of net force along y-axis also should be equal to 0, right? So that means that this force should be equal to this force. Why? Because when we'll add up this, we'll get no force. Okay, so that means over here F sin theta should be equal to your H. Okay, so see the first option 1, F cos theta is equal to G, right? So we have got this equation, so 1 is obviously correct, right? Now proceeding to 2. Okay, so we need to find out G cos theta plus H sin theta. Okay, so what is G? G is what? F cos theta, F cos theta, okay, multiplied with cos theta, plus what is H? H is F sin theta, right? So this is equal to your F sin theta, multiply it with sin theta, right? So over here we get that. So over here this will be equal to your F cos square theta, plus this will be equal to your F sin square theta, right? So that means when you add up these two, we'll get F cos square theta plus sin square theta, right? So that means over here if we just add up these two, we'll get f, right? So that means over here I can write that g cos theta plus h sin theta will be nothing but equal to your f. Okay, by this statement I can write that, right? So that means 2 is also correct. Okay, for 3, f equal to g plus h. Okay, make that g plus h. So g plus h will be equal to your f cos theta plus your f sin theta, right? So that means if I just take common f, so this will be equal to your sin theta plus cos theta, right? So that means g plus h is not equal to f, right? So that means the third option is incorrect. Okay, so that means the correct option to your question number 2 will be equal to your option number A, 1 and 2 only. Moving on to the next question, two forces act along a straight line on an object that is initially at rest. Okay, so one force is constant, the second force is opposite in direction and proportional to the velocity of the object, right? So suppose the constant force that is acting in this direction be f, okay, and the other force that is the varying force be acting in this direction, so this will be equal to, suppose this is equal to your f dash. Okay, so over here they are stating that the constant force that is acting in the opposite direction, that is the varying force, is directly proportional to the velocity, right? So that means by the constant of proportionality I can write that f dash should be equal to your k times of v, okay, where k is a constant. Okay, and the other force that is the f that is acting in this direction. Okay, so what will be the acceleration? So the acceleration would be f, okay, the force acting in this direction, minus your f dash, so the force that is acting in this direction, minus of f dash. So f dash is acting in this direction and f is acting in this direction. Okay, so what is the net force? Net force will be in this direction. So this will be equal to f minus of f dash divided by m, right? So that means over here I can write that f, what is f dash? F dash is kv, right, divided by your m. Okay, so that means over here I can write that acceleration would be equal to your f by m minus of k by m times of v, right? Now acceleration can be written as what? Acceleration can be written as dv by dt, right? So this will be equal to your f by m minus of k by m times of v, right? So from here I can write that dv divided by f minus kv, so this will be equal to your 1 by m into dt, right? I am just rearranging the variables. Okay, so we got the differential form of the equation. Okay, so one thing we need to know is that, see, initially the object is at rest, right? So that means at t equal to 0, okay, the object is at rest, so that means its velocity would be equal to 0, v is equal to 0, right? And suppose that t equal to t, okay, we want to find what will be the velocity. So suppose the velocity v be equal to v, okay, so that means what is the time parameter? At t is equal to 0, our velocity is equal to 0, right? And we need to find out the velocity at time t. So at t equal to t, suppose the velocity is v, okay, we need to find out this velocity v. Now if I just solve the integral, what will we get? Okay, so if I just solve this integral, this will be equal to your ln f minus of kv, and it would be into minus of 1 by k. Okay, so from where to where will be the velocity? From 0 to v, right? And this integral would be, again, this will be equal to your 1 by m times of t, okay, and the time parameter is from 0 to t, right? So if I just solve this now, so this will be equal to your minus of 1 by k ln f minus of kv, okay, so minus of, now put in place of v, put 0, okay, so this will be equal to minus of minus 1 by k ln f, okay, so this will be equal to your 1 by m times of t. Okay, so from here we can write that 1 by k ln f minus of 1 by k ln f minus of kv, so this will be equal to your 1 by m times of t. Okay, so from here I can write that 1 by k ln f divided by f minus of kv. Okay, so this will be equal to your 1 by t. So this is simple logarithmic formula. Okay, so from here I can write that ln f minus of kv, so this will be equal to your k by m times of t. Now I'm just taking the ln to the other side. Okay, so from here I can write that f will be f minus kv, so this will be equal to your e to the power k by m into t, right? So from here again I can write that, now I'm taking reciprocal. Okay, f minus of kv divided by f, the other side reciprocal would be minus of k by m times of t, right? So from here if I just solve for v, so v will be equal to your f by k 1 minus of e to the power minus of k by m times of t, so this will be equal to your v. Okay, so that means the speed v will be varying in this form. Now see, I can write again v in this form, k by f by k 1 minus of e to the power 1 minus of, my bad, over here I can write that this will be equal to 1 by e to the power minus of, plus of k by m times of t, so this will be equal to your v. Okay, so see that at t equal to 0, what is the velocity v? V is equal to your, so over here if I just put t equal to 0, so this term would be equal to 1. 1 divided by 1 will be 1, so the net term would be 0, right? So at t equal to 0, v equal to 0, which was always justified from the beginning also. Okay, now at suppose I want to find at t is equal to, okay, at t equal to very great time, suppose when t tends to infinity. Okay, so this term will be tending to infinity, right? So this term will be tending to infinity, so 1 by infinity will tend to how much? 0, right? So that means at t equal to very great time, when t tends to infinity, okay, we can write that velocity tends to how much? F by k, right? I can always say that. Why? Because this term now reduces to 0, so 1 minus 0 is 1, so f by k, right? So that means the velocity, what happens is that the velocity, what happens, starts from 0, okay, and at very great time, very great time, okay, so at t tends to infinity, the velocity becomes constant to f by k, so the graph will be something like this. Okay, at time greater, very great, the graph will be constant and will be equal to your f by k. Okay, so that means the velocity will start from 0, then increases. Okay, so that means the correct option to your question number 3 will be option number C, the velocity increases from 0 to a maximum. Okay, so this is a very good question. Okay, now this question is not over also. Okay, I'll leave you a quick homework. Okay, now we got the formula for your velocity. Okay, differentiate that and get acceleration and match the other options also. Okay, by doing so you'll get that only C option is correct. Okay, do it as a homework. So I hope you got the question. The correct option to your question 3 is option number C. So proceeding on to the next question, that is your question number 4. The variation of time t of acceleration a of an object is shown. Okay, so we need to find out the change in velocity of the object from t equal to 0 to t equal to 6 seconds, right? So we know that the area under AT graph, so the area under acceleration time graph, so this gives our change in velocity, right? So that means to find the change in the velocity, we need to find the area under the acceleration time graph, right? So we need to find the change in velocity from t equal to 0 seconds to t equal to 6 seconds, right? From this point to this point, right? So that means we need to find the area from t equal to 0 to t equal to 6 seconds of the AT graph, right? So that means what will be the area? Okay, so the net area can be divided into two parts. So the net area can be divided into three parts, right? First of all, this is the square. Okay, first of all, this is the rectangle. Okay, secondly, I can divide it into this rectangle also, and thirdly, we'll have a triangle. right? So that means the net area will be area 1 plus area 2 plus your area 3. Okay, so what is area 1? So the area 1 will be equal to your how much? So this is equal to your a rectangle, right? So that means the length of the rectangle is 2 and the breadth of the rectangle is 1, right? So that means area 1 is 2. Okay, so area 2 is also a rectangle. What is the length of the rectangle? It is spanning from t equal to 2 to t equal to 6, right? So that means the length is 4. Okay, and what is the breadth of the rectangle? It is spanning from t acceleration is equal to 0 to acceleration equal to 1, right? So that means this is the height. So that means this is the breadth. So that means this is the breadth, right? So this will be equal to your 1. So over here a2 will be equal to, again this will be equal to 4 into 1. So this will be equal to, the second area will be equal to 4. Okay, and what will be the third area? Third area is a rectangle. Third area is a triangle, right? Okay, so that means for this triangle I can say that what is the, so that means for this triangle I can say that what is the base of the triangle? So the base of the triangle spans from this point to this point, right? So it's spanning from t equal to 2 seconds to t equal to 6 seconds, right? So that means the base of the triangle will be equal to your how much? The base will be equal to your 4, right? So half into base. What is base? Base is 4. And height, what is the height? So the height is spanning from acceleration is equal to 1 to acceleration equal to 3. That means from here to here, right? So that means this is the height. Okay, and the height is how much? 2, right? So that means height is how much? 2, right? So that means, so this will be equal to your half into base. Base is 4, height is 2, right? So that means this will be equal to your 4. So what is the net area? So the net area will be equal to your a1 plus your a2 plus your a3. So this will be equal to your 2 plus 4 plus 4. Okay, so that means the net area, so that means the net area will be equal to your how much? This will be equal to your 10. Okay, so the correct option to your question, that is your question number 4, will be option C, 10 meter per second. Moving on to the next question, that is your question number 5. A climber of mass m slides down a vertical rope with the average acceleration a. What is the average frictional force exerted by the rope on the climber? Okay, so that means there is a rope, right, and there is a climber that is climbing down the rope, right, with an acceleration of a. Okay, so that means if I draw the free body diagram of the climber, okay, so that means over here this will be the climber, right? So the weight of the climber will be equal to your mg, that will be acting downwards. The frictional force on the climber will be upward. Why? Because the friction will try to resist the downward acceleration of the climber, right? So that means over here the frictional force will be upward, right, and the acceleration of the climber is downward, which is equal to your a. Now applying the summation of net force along the y-axis, so this will be equal to your mass into acceleration, right, Newton's second law. Okay, so what is the net force along the y-axis? Mg is acting downward, right? So mg, okay, fs, the frictional force which is fs is trying to resist, so the net force will be mg minus of fs, that is the frictional force, right? So this will be equal to your mass into acceleration is equal to your m times of a. Okay, so that means from here we get that the frictional force that will be applied, so fs will come out to be how much? Mg minus of ma. So the fs force, that is the frictional force, so this will come out to be fs is equal to your m times of g minus a. Okay, so that means the correct option to your question number 5 is option number C. I hope you got the question. Thank you. So proceeding on to the next question, that is your question number 6. A cube slides down the surface of a ramp at a constant velocity. Okay, what is the magnitude of the frictional force that acts on the cube due to the surface? Okay, suppose there is a ramp. Okay, suppose the ramp is inclined at an angle theta with the horizontal, right? So this is the angle theta and this is the horizontal. The ramp is inclined at an angle theta with the horizontal, right? And a cube slides down the surface of the ramp at a constant velocity, right? So that means there is a cube. Suppose this is the cube, and suppose the mass of the cube be m. So the cube is moving down the incline at a constant velocity, right? So that means the velocity is constant. Okay, so when will be the velocity constant? when acceleration is equal to 0, right? So if there is no acceleration, velocity will not increase or velocity will not decrease, right? Velocity will remain constant. Okay, so that means the acceleration of the mass m should be equal to your 0, right? So that means the net force that is acting on the mass m should be equal to your 0. Okay, so we need to find out what is the magnitude of the frictional force that acts on the cube due to the surface. Okay, so if I just draw the free body diagram of the cube over here, this is the cube, right? Okay, so that means from here, so from the surface this will be the normal, right? And over here this will be the frictional force that is acting. Okay, and over here downward will be our mg, right? So that means if I just make the component of mg along the incline and perpendicular to the incline, okay, so if this angle is theta, this angle will be also theta, right? So that means this will be equal to your mg cos theta, okay, and this will be equal to your mg sin theta, right? I am just dividing the force mg into its two components, one component which is perpendicular to the incline and one component which is parallel to the incline, right? When such that when I'll add up these two vectors, we'll get the net force vector, that is mg. Okay, so that means our mg is replaced by these two vectors, so I'm just rubbing off mg. Okay, so that means the net so that means this is the free body diagram of the cube m. Okay, so that means see, for the cube m I can write that the summation of net forces along the incline should be equal to your 0, along the incline should be equal to your 0, and the summation of net forces perpendicular to the incline should be equal to also 0. Okay, so let's just take the first. So summation of net forces along the incline. Okay, so that means mg sin theta is acting downwards, so mg sin theta, right? Okay, and fs is acting upward. Fs is what? Frictional force, so minus fs. Okay, so this is the net force which is down the incline, right? So this should be equal to your 0. So that means the frictional force comes out to be how much? It comes out to be mg sin theta. So that means, coming to the question, what is the magnitude of the frictional force that acts on the cube due to the surface? Okay, so this will be the component of the weight that is parallel to the plane. Okay, so that means the correct option to your question 6 will be option B. Why option B? See, over here fs is what? The frictional force is equal to your mg sin theta, right? And mg sin theta is which component? Mg was this, right? Mg was this. Mg sin theta is the component which is parallel to the plane, right? So that means the correct option to your question 6 will be the component of the cube parallel to the plane. Okay, so that means the correct option to your question 6 is option B. Moving on to the next question, a ball is thrown upward. A ball is thrown vertically upward. Air resistance is negligible. What is the variation of the time t of the kinetic energy of the ball? Okay, so that means over here we have thrown a ball vertically upward. Okay, so suppose this is the ground and we have thrown a ball vertically upward, so this is the ball, and suppose the velocity of the ball be v. Okay, so we are throwing a ball with a velocity v upward. Okay, so that means over here I can write that final velocity of the ball should be equal to initial velocity of the ball plus acceleration into time, right? So we can write this equation, but instead of writing this equation, first let us analyze the trajectory of the ball. Okay, so over here the ball will go up. Okay, so at a particular point what will happen? You also know that the velocity of the ball will become 0, right? Then what will happen? It will again fall back and come to the ground. Okay, so this is the basic trajectory that we all know. Okay, so now if I just apply the equation that the final velocity of the ball is equal to initial velocity plus acceleration into time. Okay, so suppose the ball is over here in this point. Okay, suppose the ball is in this point, so it's moving upward with a velocity, suppose v1. Okay, so that means the final velocity of the ball is what? v1. Okay, what is the initial velocity? Is thrown with the velocity u. Okay, now what is the acceleration of the ball? See, acceleration of the ball will be g downwards, right? Because the acceleration of the ball will be the acceleration due to the gravity, right? And the gravitational acceleration will be downward, so minus of g times of t. Why minus of g? Because downward is taken as negative and upward is taken as your positive. Okay, since the velocity of the ball is thrown in the upward direction, that is in this direction, so it's taken as plus v. Okay, the final velocity of the ball is in the upward direction, right? So that's why it's also taken as plus v1. Okay, I hope you got this. Okay, so that means v1 should be equal to your v minus of gt. Okay, so what is the kinetic energy at this point? So the kinetic energy at this point will be equal to half m v1 square, right? Okay, so this is what? This is equal to your half m. What is v1? v1 is v minus of gt whole square, right? So that means the kinetic energy is ek is related through this equation, right? So that means see that ek, that is the kinetic energy of the ball, is equal to your half m v minus of gt whole square, right? So over here I can write that ek, that is the kinetic energy, so this will be equal to your half m. Over here if I just elaborate this, so this will be equal to your g square t square minus of 2v gt plus your v square, right? So over here I can see that the kinetic energy at a particular point, suppose at this point, that is point 1, is proportional to the function of your t square, right? It's proportional to the function of t square. Okay, so the graph over here will not be linear. Why? Because for the graph to be linear, what should it happen? That the kinetic energy should be proportional to the function of t, right? Only t, not t square, right? So then the graph would have been linear. Okay, but over here this is not the case, right? So over here, see, option number A and option number B, these are linear graphs. Okay, so over here this will not be the correct option, this will not be the correct option. Okay, now in between C and D, okay, see how will you differentiate this? Okay, so these are both 2-degree graphs. Okay, over here see that at time equal to your v by g, what will be the kinetic energy? Put over here t equal to v by g, so ek will be equal to your, put this, you'll get 0, right? So and after t by g, right, so that means at time equal to your v by g, what will happen? The kinetic energy will become 0. Okay, so which is also the case you can verify. Why? Because v by g is the time to reach the maximum height for a particle that is thrown upwards, right? At the maximum height, what happens? See, at the maximum height, velocity becomes 0, right? So the kinetic energy is also becoming 0, right? So this condition is valid. Then what will happen? Then after reaching this point, it will again come downward, so it will again come downward and back to the earth, right? So after the time t equal to your v by g, the body will again attain velocity and it will come downward, right? So that means after t equal to your, so after t equal to your v by g, what will happen? The body will again gain kinetic energy, so it will be gaining kinetic energy again, right? So which of the following graphs is correct? In graph number D, we see that after a particular time the graph becomes 0, right? After this time, okay, and again after this time the kinetic energy is increasing in this manner, right? So that means the correct option to your question number 7 will be option number D. Why? Because it's a, first of all, it's a 2-degree graph. Okay, secondly, after t equal to your v by g, the kinetic energy is becoming 0, but after that time what is happening? The kinetic energy is again increasing, right? Which is also verified from this here. Okay, see, at this point t equal to your v by g, kinetic energy is becoming 0, and after this point it's accelerating downwards, so at any particular time kinetic energy will be again gaining. Okay, so that means the correct option to your question number 7 is option number D. I hope you got the question. So proceeding on to the next question, that is your question number 8. The tension in a horizontal spring is directly proportional to the extension of the spring. The energy stored in the spring at an extension x is E. What is the work done by the string when its extension changes from x to x by 4? Okay, so we have a pretty simple formula for this question, that the work done by the spring is equal to your half k, your initial extension whole square minus of final extension whole square, Okay, so the work done by the spring, okay, so this is the work done by the spring. So work done by the spring, this will be equal to your half k. What is the initial extension? The initial extension is x, right? So that means this is over here is x, okay, and over here the final extension is your x by 4. So over here, so this is square, okay, so x by 4 whole squared. Okay, so this will be the work done by the spring. So the work done by the spring, so this will be equal to your half k. Over here this will be x square, and x by 4 over here, if I just multiply it with, and x by 4 whole square will be x square by 16, right? So over here I can write that the work done by the spring, so this will be equal to your half k 15x square divided by your 16, right? So that means the work done by the spring over here, this will be equal to your half k x square into 15 by 16. Okay, now over here they are given this work done by this spring in the form of energy E. Okay, and they are saying that the energy stored in the spring at a extension x is E. Okay, so that means E will be equal to your, what is the spring energy? Half k into extension whole square. So at a extension x our energy is E. Okay, so that means half k x square energy will be E, right? So that means over here I can instead of half k x square I can substitute your E. So work done by the spring, so this will be equal to your 15E divided by your 16. So the correct option to your question number 8 will be option number D. On to the next question, that is your question number 9. A mass m of water is at a temperature of 290 Kelvin. The specific heat capacity of water is C. Ice at its melting point is added to the water to reduce the water temperature to the freezing point. Okay, so initially there is the water. Okay, so that means over here there is water. Okay, so the mass of the water is m. Okay, and the temperature of the water, that is initial temperature, so this is equal to how much? It's given to be 290 Kelvin. Okay, and what is happening? This is the initial state. Okay, so this is the initial state. Now what is happening over here is that, so suppose there is ice. Okay, over here this is the slab of ice. Okay, and the ice is at its melting point is added to the water. Okay, so that means the ice is at its melting point. Okay, ice is at its melting point. So what will happen when this ice will be added to this water at 290 Kelvin? Finally what will happen? Finally we'll get that, what is happening finally? So finally what is happening? The water is coming to its freezing point. Okay, so that means over here the water over here, so that means over here the temperature will be 0 degrees Celsius. Okay, so that means the final temperature of the water in the jar, okay, so that means this will be equal to your 273 Kelvin. Okay, so over here by the conservation of energy I can write that the initial energy of the water in the jar, okay, so plus the energy that is added, okay, by the ice, so this will be equal to your nothing but, so this will be equal to your final energy of the water in the jar. Okay, so that means over here I can write that, see, what is the initial energy of the water in this jar? The initial energy is what? M into C into T initial. Okay, now what is the energy that is added? So the energy that is being added is that, see over here, when the ice will come in contact to the water, what will happen? The ice will change its state. Okay, so the ice will change its state from your ice to your water, from your ice to your water, right? And we know that for ice to change its state from ice to water, it needs energy, right? And how much energy it needs, right? It needs ml energy, right? Mass into latent heat of fusion, right? So who will supply this ml energy? The water which is at 290 Kelvin will supply this energy ml, right? So that means the energy being added is what? Is minus ml. Why? Because from this initial thermal energy we are taking away ml heat, right? So minus of ml, where m is the mass of the ice. Okay, so this is equal to your nothing but your mc into final tf, that is the final energy, right? So from here I can write that ml is nothing but is equal to your mc ti minus of Tf. Okay, so that means over here I can write that the mass of the ice will be equal to your mc by capital L Ti minus of Tf, right? So what is initial temperature? Initial temperature is 290 Kelvin, right? So mc by L, so initial temperature is 290 minus what is the final temperature? 273, right? So that means the mass of ice that is needed is nothing but this is equal to your 17 mc by L. So the correct option to your question number 9 will be option number A. So I hope you got the question. So proceeding on to the next question, that is your question number 10. An ideal gas is in a closed container which changes to its volume and temperature when taken together must cause a decrease in the gas pressure. So as the gas is ideal, over here I can write that PV, this is equal to your nRT, right? So from here I can write that pressure is nothing but your nRT by V. Okay, so now see that nr, so this is equal to a constant, right? Number of moles into universal gas constant. Okay, so this is a constant. Okay, so for nr I can write that nr can be replaced by k. Okay, so as it is a constant I am replacing nr with a constant k. So over here k T by V. Okay, so that means from here I can see that pressure is inversely proportional to your volume and pressure is directly proportional to your temperature. Okay, why can I write that? See, when you will merge these two, we'll get this equation. So that means what happens is that as pressure is inversely proportional to your volume, what happens? So as volume increases, pressure decreases, right? And pressure is directly proportional to your temperature. So as temperature decreases, pressure decreases, right? So that means when the volume will increase, so when the volume will increase and the temperature will decrease pressure will decrease. Okay, so that means for pressure to decrease the volume must increase and the temperature must decrease. Okay, so that means the correct option to your question number 10 is option number D, that volume must increase and pressure and temperature must decrease. On to the next question, that is your question number 11. Two flasks P and Q contain an ideal gas and are connected with a tube of negligible volume compared to the flask. Okay, so the volume of P is twice the volume of Q. Okay, so that means if the volume of Q be V, so that means the volume of P will be equal to your 2V. Okay, the P is held at a temperature of 200 Kelvin. Okay, so that means over here P is held at a temperature of how much? 200 Kelvin. Okay, and Q is held at a temperature of how much? 400 Kelvin. Okay, so we need to find the mass of the gas in P divided by the mass of the gas in Q. So in this question, let the pressure in the first flux, that is flux P, so this be pressure be P1. Okay, and the pressure at the second flux, that is flux Q, suppose the pressure at the second flux, that is flux Q, is P2. Okay, so these are the pressures. Okay, P2. Okay, so as the two flux P and Q are connected, I can say that pressure will be equal in the both flux. So P1 should be equal to your P2. Okay, so these are our equations for volume. Okay, and these are our equations for temperature, not equations, parameters. Okay, so over here for the flux P, okay, suppose this is the flux P, I can write that P1 V1 is equal to nRT1, right? N1RT1. Okay, so what is pressure? Pressure is P1, right? What is volume? Volume of the flux Q, volume of the flux P, so the volume of the flux P is 2V, right? So this is equal to your 2V. What is the number of moles? N1. Okay, R is the universal gas constant and T1 is the temperature. What is the temperature of the flux P? 200 Kelvin, right? 200. Okay, again for the flux Q I can write that, so this is the flux Q, so I can write that P2V2 is equal to your N2RT2. Okay, so what is the pressure of the flux Q? The pressure of the flux Q is how much? P2, right? So that means P2. What is the volume of the flux Q? The volume of the flux Q is how much? V, right? Volume of the flux Q is V. So what is the number of moles in the flux Q? So flux Q number of moles is your N2. Okay, universal gas constant is R and your temperature of the flux Q is how much? 400 Kelvin given. Okay, so that means this will be equal to your 400. Okay, so let us suppose this is our equation 1 and let us suppose this are our equation 2. Now if I just divide these two equations, what will we get? P1 into 2V divided by your P2 into V. So this will be equal to your N1R into 200 divided by N2R into 400. Okay, so over here I can write that this will be equal to your twice of P1 by P2. So this will be equal to your N1 divided by your twice of N2. Okay. And we know that since the flux are connected, what will happen? The pressure will be equal. So that means P1 should be equal to your P2, right? So that means over here I can write that 2 equal to, since P1 and P2 are same, 2 equal to your N1 by twice of N2. Okay, so from here we get that, N1 by N2, this ratio is how much? 4. Now what is N1? N1 is the number of moles in the flux P and N2 is the number of moles in the flux Q. Okay, so we know that N1 by N2, this ratio is nothing but also equal to the mass ratio, right? So that means the mass of the gas in flux 1 divided by mass of the gas in flux 2. Okay, so this will be equal to your M1 by M2. So this will be equal to your 4. So that means the mass of the gas in flux P divided by mass of the gas in flux Q. So this will be equal to your 4. So the correct option to your question number 11 is option C, 4. So proceeding on to the next question, that is your question number 12. The motion of an object is described by the equation acceleration is proportional to the negative of displacement, right? So over here this is, we all know, so this is the equation of your SHM. Okay, so what is the direction of the acceleration relative to that of the displacement, and what is the displacement when the speed is maximum? Okay, so that means in SHM what happens is that acceleration is directly proportional to the negative of displacement, or acceleration is written as minus of omega square into x. Okay, so let us see what happens. Okay, so over here suppose the particle oscillates about this point, about the origin. Okay, so let us mark the origin. So the origin will be 0, 0. Okay, so origin is 0, 0. Okay, so when the displacement is positive, so suppose the particle is going in the positive of x direction. Okay, so that means when the particle goes in the positive of x direction, what happens? The displacement x is positive, right? And omega squares, the square of any number is positive, right? So that means what happens when the particle goes in the positive x direction, what happens? Acceleration is what? So minus, so this is negative, right? Minus is negative. What is omega square? Omega square is positive, right? And what is x? X is positive, right? So that means when I just combine this sign, what happens? Acceleration comes out to be negative, right? So what does this negative means? When the particle goes in the positive x direction, what happens? Acceleration is in the negative of x direction, right? So that means acceleration is directed in the negative of x direction, that is in this direction. Okay, and suppose when the particle goes in the negative of x direction. Okay, so suppose the particle is going in this direction, what happens? See, now x is negative, right? So acceleration would be what? Acceleration is, first of all, this is negative, right? Negative. Okay, omega square is positive and x is your negative. So that the sign of acceleration would be positive, right? So that means when the particle goes in the negative of x direction, acceleration is directed in the positive of x direction. Okay, and when the particle goes in the positive x direction, acceleration is directed towards the negative of x direction, right? So that means the acceleration is always directed towards the center. Okay, so that is this point, right? So that means I can say that the direction of the acceleration relative to the displacement is always opposite, right? In the positive x, the displacement is in this direction, but the acceleration, so this is the displacement, but the acceleration is in this direction. So this is in the positive x. In the negative x, what happens? Displacement is in the negative x direction, okay, but the acceleration is in the positive of x direction, right? So that means wherever the displacement vector v, the acceleration vector will be its opposite. Okay, so that means in between option number C and option number D, one will be correct. Okay, so we need to find out the displacement when the speed is maximum. Okay, we know that the velocity, so we know that the speed is maximum at the origin, right? The speed is maximum at the center of oscillation in a SHM. The speed is maximum at the center of oscillation, okay, at the center of oscillation, okay. So that means over here, if I just take the center of oscillation to be the origin, what will happen? The speed will be maximum at the origin, right? And what is the displacement of the and what is the displacement of the particle from the origin? Zero, right? So the displacement is zero. So that means when the speed is maximum, the displacement is zero, right? So that means the correct option to your question number 12 will be option number D. Proceeding on to the next question, a transverse traveling wave is moving through a medium. The graph shows for one instant the variation with the distance of the displacement of the particles in the medium. So in this graph we are shown how the displacement of the particles varies with the distance traveled by the traveling wave, okay. The frequency of the traveling wave is 25 hertz, okay. So the frequency is given to be how much? 25 hertz, okay. And the speed of the traveling wave is given to be how much? The speed of the traveling wave v is given to be how much? 100 meter per second, okay. So we know that the equation of the traveling wave is y is equal to your a sine 2 pi by lambda into vt, right? Now y is equal to, what is a? A is the amplitude, see. So let the amplitude of the traveling wave be capital A, okay. So that means over here this will be a, and in the downward this will be minus a, okay. So what is the amplitude? The maximum displacement of the moving particles, okay. So that means over here I can say that a will be the amplitude, right? Sine, okay, 2 pi. Now what is lambda? We know frequency, right? So and we also know velocity, right? So we can write that velocity is equal to your n lambda, right? So from here I can write that what is the velocity? Velocity is how much? 100, right? Is equal to your n times of lambda, okay. So from here we get that what is velocity? Velocity is 100. What frequency, right? What is the frequency? 25, okay, into lambda. So from here we get that the wavelength, that is lambda, is how much? The wavelength lambda is 4, okay. Substitute over here 4, 2 pi by 4 into vt. What is v? V is 100, right? 100 times of t, right? So that means the equation of the traveling wave is y is equal to a sine 50 pi t, okay. So this is the equation of the traveling wave, okay. So now if I just come back to the question, the option number A states that the particles at x and y are in phase. Is it so? See, over here at x, okay, the particle is over at the extreme end. So at the point x, the particle is at the extreme end, that is the extreme upward end, right? And at the point y, I can see that the particles are at the extreme downward end, right? Extreme downward end, okay. So that means, are they in phase? No, they are not in phase. In fact, the phase difference between x and y will be pi. That means they are completely out of phase, right? Why? Because at x it is at completely upward position, and at y it is at completely downward position, right? So that means they are out of phase. So option number A is incorrect, okay. The velocity of the particle at x is maximum, okay. So let us see, okay. So over here what will be velocity? Velocity will be over here from here dy by dt, right? So from here velocity would be a 50 pi cos 50 pi t, right? So from here I can write that velocity is equal to your 50 pi times of a into, so for cos 50 pi t, what can I write? I can write that this will be equal to your 1 minus of sine square 50 pi t, right? Now sine square 50 pi t is what? Over here sine 50 pi t is y by a, right? From this equation, okay. So from here we can get that velocity is equal to your 50 pi a root over of 1 minus of y by a whole square, okay. Now what is the displacement of the particle? So we want to find the velocity of the particle at x, right? So what is the displacement of the particle at x? It's a, right? It's at the maximum amplitude, so it's a. Okay, so over here if I just substitute, velocity will be equal to your 50 pi a, this will be equal to your 1 minus a by a whole square. If you solve this will come out to be 0, right? So that means the velocity of the particle at a is maximum. This is wrong, right? The velocity of the particle at x is 0. Now coming to the third option, the horizontal distance between x and z is 3 meter. Okay, now over here I can see that this is the total wavelength, right? This will be the total wavelength, okay, lambda. So this is the total wavelength lambda. Okay, so I can divide the total wavelength into 4 parts, 1 2 and 3 4, right? So this is 1, this is 2, this is 3 and this is 4. Okay, so if I divide the whole wave into 4 equal parts, what will be the value of each part? Okay, so this value will be lambda by 4. Okay, this value will be lambda by 4. So from here to here this will be lambda by 4. Again from here to here this value will be also how much? Lambda by 4. And from here to here this value to this point, okay, this value will be also how much? Lambda by 4. Okay, so how many lambda by 4 we are taking? We are taking from this point, from x to your point z. So that means lambda by 4 plus lambda by 4 plus lambda by 4, right? So that means the horizontal distance between x and z is how much? 3 times of lambda by 4. Okay, now what is lambda? We found out lambda to be 4, right? So that means this will be 3 by 4 into 4, right? So that means this will be equal to your 3 meter. So the option number C is correct. Okay, now we want to explore the option number D also. The velocity of the particle at y is 100 meter per second. So again we want to find the velocity of the particle at this point, that is y. Okay, what is the displacement of the particle of the medium at y? It is at the maximum amplitude, right? Maximum downward amplitude, so it is minus a. Okay, so that means again in this equation put y equal to minus a. So if in this equation you put y equal to minus a, velocity becomes 50 pi a 1 minus of minus a by a whole square. If you solve this you will get 0. Okay, so that means the velocity of the particle at y is 100 meter per second. This is wrong. Okay, so that means this is also wrong. So the correct option to your question number 13 is option number C. Moving on to the next question, that is your question number 14. Monochromatic light is used to produce double slit interference fringes on a screen. The fringe separation on a screen is y. Okay, the distance from the slits to the screen and the separation of the slits are both doubled, and the light source is unchanged. So we need to find out what is the new fringe separation on the screen. Okay, so that means over here they are given that the fringe separation that was initial, this is equal to y. Okay, and we know that the fringe separation is equal to your d lambda by d. Okay, d lambda by small d, where d is the distance between the slits and the screen. Slits and the screen. Okay, and small d is the distance between the two slits. Okay, so small d is the distance between the slits. Distance between the slits. Okay, now what is happening? The distance from the slits to the screen and the separation of the slits are both doubled. Okay, so now the d is becoming how much? 2d, right? The distance between the slits and the screen is doubled. Okay, lambda becomes lambda. Okay, so this is y dash. Okay, the new separation. Now what is small d? Small d is the distance between the slits. The distance between the slits is also doubled. Okay, so this is equal to 2d, right? So that means y dash, that is the new separation, this is equal to your again lambda d by small d. Okay, and what is lambda d by small d? Y only. Okay, so that means what is happening? The new fringe separation will not change. Okay, the previous fringe separation will be equal to the new fringe separation. So the correct option to your question number 14 is option number B, y. So proceeding on to the next question, that is your question number 15. Unpolarized light is incident under polarizing filters X and Y. Okay, they are arranged so that the light emerging from Y has the maximum intensity. Okay, X is fixed and Y is rotated through theta about the direction of the incident beam. Okay, so we know that when the polarizer is rotated through an angle theta, the intensity becomes I naught. The intensity I naught is equal to I cos square theta. Okay, so what does this mean? What does this equation mean? I is the previous intensity, okay, theta is the angle rotated, okay, and the final intensity after the rotation happens is I naught. Okay, so I naught is the final intensity. So they are saying what are the first three successive values of theta for which the final transmitted intensity is maximum. Okay, so after the first rotation, what is the intensity? The intensity is, suppose the intensity is I1. I1 will be equal to your I cos square theta, right? Now after the second rotation, okay, for the second rotation the intensity is I1, right? Now after the second rotation, suppose the intensity becomes I2. So what will be I2? I2 will be equal to I1 cos square theta 2. Okay, so this is theta 1 theta 2, right? Now after the third rotation, now for the third rotation the intensity of the light previously is I2, right? So after the third rotation, suppose the intensity of the light becomes I3. So I3 would be equal to how much? This will be equal to your I2 cos square theta 1. Okay. So that means over here I3 will be equal to your I2 cos square theta 3, right? So I can also write I3, so this is equal to, what is I2? I2 is I1 cos square theta 2, right? So theta 2 into cos square theta 3. Okay, and what is I1? I1 is I cos square theta 1. Okay, I1 is what? I cos square theta 1 cos square theta 2 into cos square theta 3. So this is the net intensity after 3 consecutive rotations. Okay, so what we want, what are the first 3 consecutive values of theta for which the final transmitted intensity is maximum. Okay, so that means this value should be maximum, right? And what is the maximum value of this expression? The maximum value of the expression will be I. Why? Because after 3 consecutive rotations also the intensity cannot be greater than I. The maximum intensity will be always I. Okay, so that means from here we can see that, so that means from here we see that the maximum intensity will be equal to I, right? So I3 will be equal to I. So instead of I3 I am substituting I. Why? Because the maximum intensity is I. Okay, so this will be equal to I cos square theta 1 cos square theta 2 into cos square theta 3. So that means from here we get that cos square theta 1 cos square theta 2 cos square theta 3. Okay, so this will be theta 2 into cos square theta 3. So this value should be equal to 1, for which what happens, the maximum intensity, for which what happens, the so this value should be equal to 1. Okay, so over here if I just come back to the questions, so now we will match the following options. Okay, so what will be correct? Cos square theta 1 cos square theta 2 into cos square theta 3, this value should be equal to 1 for the correct option. Okay, so for the first option 90 180 270, so cos square 90 cos square 180 into cos square 270. Okay, cos square 90 is 0 multiplied by anything will be equal to your 0, right? So that means over here what is happening, this value is becoming equal to 0. Okay, but this value should be equal to 1, right? So for so the first option is incorrect. Now proceeding on to the second option, see again it has 90. Okay, so will be cos square 90, this will be 0, and again the total expression will become 0. So this is also incorrect. Okay, now proceeding on to the next option, 180 360 540. Okay, so that means cos square 180 cos square 360 cos square 540. Okay, so what is cos square 180? Cos 180 is 1, right? So cos square 180, so this will be equal to your 1. So we know that cos square 180 is minus 1 whole square. Okay, cos 360 is 1. Okay, so this is equal to 1. Okay, cos 540 is again minus 1, right? Minus 1 whole square. So this value is equal to 1. So this can be the correct option. Okay, now proceeding on to the fourth option, that is your 180, 540 and 720. Over here I can see that cos square 180 into cos square your 540 into cos square your 720. Okay, cos square 180 is minus 1 whole square. Cos square 540 is also minus 1 whole square. Cos square 720 is 1 whole square. So this value is also 1. Okay, so both of these option can be correct. Okay, but now read the question carefully. So they are asking what are the first three successive values of theta for which the final transmitted intensity is maximum. First three. Okay, so for the option C, this is 180, 360, 540. Okay, but for option D, this is 180, 540 and 720. So they are ditching 360, but for 360 also we can get the correct option, right? So that means the first three value will be 180, 360 and 540. Okay, so the correct option to your question 15 will be option number C. So proceeding on to the next question, that is your question number 16. A pipe is open at both ends. What is the correct about the standing wave formed in the air of the pipe? Okay, so this is the diagram. Okay, this is the open pipe which is open at both the ends. Okay, over here you can see the waves that are formed in the fundamental, the second harmonic, the third harmonic. Okay, in the pipe open at the both ends. Okay, so in the fundamental you can see that there is only one node and there are two antinodes, right? So that means in the fundamental the number of nodes plus antinodes is 3. Okay, in the second harmonic I can see that the number of nodes is 1, 2, right? And the number of antinodes is 1, 2 and 3, right? So that means the total number of nodes and antinodes is how much? 5. Okay, now in the third harmonic I can see that the number of nodes is 1, 2, 3 and the number of antinodes is 1, 2, 3, 4. So that means the total number of nodes and antinodes is 7. Okay, so in this way the total number of nodes plus antinodes will always be an odd number. Okay, so that the correct option to your question number 16 will be option number A. I hope you got the question. So proceeding on to the next question, that is your question number 17. A negatively charged particle is placed in a uniform gravitational field is positioned midway between the two charged conducting plates. Okay, so over here this is the positive charged conducting plate and this is the negative charged conducting plate. Okay, so this is basically a capacitor. The potential difference between the two plates is adjusted until the particle is held at rest to the plates. Okay, see over here what is happening is that this is the negatively charged particle. Okay, suppose the negatively charged particle has a mass m. Okay, so that means over here the weight will be mg. Okay, mg acting downwards. Okay, and we know that the electric field between a capacitor is how much? The electric field between a capacitor is sigma by epsilon naught. What is sigma? The surface charge density of the plates. Okay, so that means over here electric field will be in this direction, E vector, right? So what will be the force acting on the particle? Since it is a negatively charged particle, the force acting on the particle will be upward, right? So that means this will be equal to your Q times of E, right? And for equilibrium what should happen? Mg should be equal to your Q times of E, right? So what will be the Mg? So Mg will be equal to what is Q? Q is Q. Okay, E is sigma by epsilon naught. Okay, so this is the equation for equilibrium. So this is the equation for equilibrium. Okay, now what they are saying? What change will cause the particle to accelerate downwards relative to the plate? Okay, so decreasing the charge of the particle. Okay, so if I just decrease the charge of the particle, what will happen? The overall QE, that is the force acting upward, will be decreased, right? So if it decrease, what happens? this will not be able to balance out the mg, right? So that means it will accelerate downward. So the correct option to your question number 17 is option number A. Okay, so if I just explore the other options also, decreasing the separation between the plates. Okay, so is the force that is acting upwards, the force that is acting upwards is q sigma by epsilon naught. Okay, so does it depend upon the separation between the plates? No, it does not depend. Okay, it depends upon the charge of the particle, the surface charge density of the plates, and the epsilon naught. So it does not depend, so it is wrong. Increasing the length of the plate, so it does not also depends upon the length of the plates also. In nowhere in the relation is the length of the plates. Okay, so if I increase the length of the plates, nothing will happen. Okay, so that means this option is also incorrect. Increasing the potential difference between the plates. So okay, so if I just increase the potential difference between the plates, what will happen? Okay, will the force that is acting upward change? No, it will not change, right? So that means what will happen, this will be also the incorrect. So the correct option to your question number 17 will be option number A. To the next question, a diagram shows a resistor network. Okay, the potential difference between x and y is given to be 8 volt. Okay, so we need to find out the current in the 5 ohm resistor. So suppose the potential of the point x be vx and the potential of the point y be vy. Okay, and what they have given that vx minus of vy is nothing but your 8 volt. Okay. Now let us suppose the main current in the circuit be I. Okay, at the junction x the main current is getting divided into two subparts. Okay, one is your I1 and the other is your I2. Okay, now the I2 is flowing through the 5 ohm resistor. Again the I2 is also flowing through the 3 ohm resistor, right? And it is finally coming to the junction Y. Okay, and for the current that is I1 is also flowing through the 3 ohm resistor, right? Then the I1 is flowing through the 1 ohm resistor and the I1 is coming to the Y joint. Okay, so over here after coming to the Y joint, they both get combined and leave as I. Okay, so this is the distribution of current in the resistor network. Okay, so now if I just take the I2 resistor network, what will we get? See, over here this is I2. Okay, the potential of this point is Vx. Okay, now I2 is passing through your 5 ohm resistor, right? So the 5 ohm resistor is given by a box, but I am changing it to a resistor form. Okay, so over here it's passing through the 5 ohm resistor. Okay, after that it is passing through the 3 ohm resistor, right? See in the figure. Okay, again after that what is happening, it's going and meeting the Y. Okay, and the potential of the point, so this is the Y point, right? And the potential of the point Y is your Vy, right? This is the Y point and this is the X point. Okay, so over here if I just write Kirchhoff's law for the sub circuit, I can write that Vx, okay, the potential at the point X is your Vx. So the current I2 is flowing through the 5 ohm resistor, right? So that means if I just go in the direction of the current, what will happen? Potential drop will take place, right? So that means Vx minus of your 5 times of I2. Okay, now again I am going in the direction of the current. Okay, so that means what is happening now, again the I2 is passing through the 3 ohm resistor, so I can also write minus of 3I2, right? Again I am going in the direction of current, so what I am doing is that I am traveling from X in the direction of current. Okay, so what is the potential at point X? Vx, right? So after point X the I2 current is flowing through the 5 ohm resistor and we are going in the direction of current, so net potential drop will take place, which is I times of R, which is 5 times of I2. Again I2 current is flowing through the 3 ohm resistor and we are going in the direction of current, so net potential drop again will take place, right? And finally by traveling in the direction of the current we reach the point Y, right? So that means at the point Y what is the potential? Vy. Okay, so this is the basic Kirchhoff's law for the sub-circuit. Okay, so over here I can write that Vx minus of Vy, so this will be equal to your 5 times of I2 plus 3 times of your I2. So over here I can write that I2 will be equal to 1, right? So that means over here 1 will be equal to your I2. Okay, so that means we got the value of your I2. Okay, so what is the current that is flowing through the 5 ohm resistor? Right, I2 is the current, right? So this is the current only that is flowing through the 5 ohm resistor. Okay, so that means the correct option to your question number 19 will be option number A, 1 ohm. I hope you got the question. So proceeding on to the next question, that is your question number 20. When a wire with an electric current I is placed in a magnetic field B, it experiences a magnetic force F. Over here we know that the force is nothing but is equal to your L into I cross B, right? So this is the magnetic force. Okay, so over here L is the length of the wire, right? I is the current that is flowing through the wire, and B is the magnetic field of strength, right? So in order to find the direction F, we need to know something about cross product. Okay, suppose there are two vectors, okay, A vector and your B vector. Okay, so suppose A cross B is equal to your C vector. A cross V is equal to your C vector, right? So that means over here C vector is both perpendicular to A vector and B vector, right? So C vector is both perpendicular to your A vector and your B vector. So this is the definition of your cross product, right? So that means C vector would be perpendicular to A vector and C vector would be perpendicular to B vector, right? And we also write this that C vector actually lies in the plane that is perpendicular to A vector and B vector, lies in the plane that is perpendicular to A vector and B vector. Okay, so this is the definition of your cross product, that is the direction of C vector which is formed by the cross product of A vector and B vector. Okay, so this is the standard definition of the direction of C vector, right? Now over here over here we can write the force vector as L times of I cross B, right? So that means over here what we can say? We can say that F vector will be perpendicular to the direction of the current and F vector will be perpendicular to the magnetic field strength also. So that means over here we can say that F vector will lie in the plane that is perpendicular to your I and B. So that is perpendicular to your I and B, right? So that means over here we can say that the force vector will be at an angle 90 degree to the plane containing I and B. Okay, so that means the correct option to your question number 20 will be option number D. Okay, so let us explore the other options also. Option number A says that in a direction determined by A only. No, it is not true. See, F is perpendicular to I, okay, but F is perpendicular to B also, right? So that means it is also determined by the direction of the magnetic field strength B. So this is the incorrect option. In a direction perpendicular by B only. Okay, so this is the first question only. Okay, see, it is true that is determined by B, but is also determined by A, right? So that means B is incorrect. Okay, in a plane containing A and B. Okay, what is the definition? Go back to the definition. The definition says that C actually lies in the plane perpendicular to A and B, not in the plane of A and B. Okay, so that means this option is incorrect also. The correct option to your question number 20 is option number D. Next question, that is your question number 21. An object hangs from a light string and moves in a horizontal circle of radius r. Okay, so the string makes an angle theta with the vertical. Okay, the angular speed of the object is omega, so we need to find out tan theta. Okay, so this is the object, this is the string, and this is the angle that it makes with the vertical. So this is the angle theta. Okay, so in order to solve this question, we need to first of all draw the free body diagram of the block of mass m. Okay, so this is the block of mass m. Okay, so now see that this is the string, right? And the string provide tension. Okay, and the tension always acts away from the body. Okay, so that means over here the tension will act in this manner. Okay, so this will be the tension T. Okay, and the weight of the body is always acting downwards, so this will be mg acting downwards. Okay, so now see that if I just complete the triangle, okay, so if this angle is theta, this is 90 degrees, so this angle will be how much? 90 degree minus of theta, right? So that means over here I can see that the angle between the tension and the horizontal, okay, so this angle will be how much? This angle will be 90 degree minus of theta. Okay, so over here see that the object is moving in a horizontal circle of radius r and the angular speed of the object is omega, right? So that means the centrifugal force will be m omega square r, m omega square r, where r is the radius of the circle. Okay, and the centrifugal force always acts away from the center, right? So this is the center. Okay, so the centrifugal force will be acting away from the center, that means in this direction, that is away from the center. Okay, so that means in this direction the centrifugal force m omega square r will be acting. Okay, so that means now if I just fix up the axis, okay, see this will be the y axis, right? And this will be our x axis. Okay, and we can say that the object is in equilibrium. Okay, so that means over here I can say that the summation of net force along x axis, this should be equal to 0, and the summation of net force along y axis, this should be equal to your 0. Okay, so that means over here if I say that, so that means over here I can write that t sine 90 minus theta, okay, that is the component of t along the y axis, right? So that means this is the component of t along the y axis, right, which is nothing but t sine 90 minus theta. And what is the component of t along the x axis? So that means the component of t along the x axis will be equal to your t cos of 90 minus theta, right? So that means this will be equal to your nothing but t cos 90 minus theta, right? So why we are breaking it in components? See, when we'll add these two components up, we'll get the net tension, that is T, which is acting at an angle theta with the vertical. Okay, so that means we have replaced T with its two components, that is the x component and the y component. Okay, so let me just rub T. So that means over here I can say that the component of the t along the y axis, that is t sine 90 minus theta, should balance out your mg. So that means the component of t along y axis should be equal to your mg, right? So in this way the summation of net force along the y axis will be equal to your 0, right? So that means I can write that t sine 90 minus theta, so this should be equal to your mg. Okay, and the component of t along the x axis, so this should balance out this net centrifugal force, right? So this is equal to your m omega square r. So that means the net force along x axis should be also 0. So that means the component of t along the x axis, so this should balance out your centrifugal force, which is equal to your m omega square r. So that means t cos 90 minus theta, so this should be equal to your m omega square r. Okay, so that means if I just divide these two equations, okay, so that means t sine 90 minus theta divided by t cos 90 minus theta, so this should be equal to your g by omega square r. Okay, so that means what is sine 90 minus theta? Sine 90 minus theta is cos theta. And what is cos 90 minus theta? Cos 90 minus theta is sine theta. Okay, so this is equal to your g by omega square r. Okay, so that means over here cot theta comes out to be g by omega square r. But we don't want cot theta, we want tan theta, right? And what is tan theta? Tan theta is 1 divided by your cot theta. So this is equal to your 1 divided by g by omega square r. So this is equal to your omega square r by g. Okay, so that means the correct option to your question number 21 will be option number A. So proceeding on to the next question, that is your question number 22. An object of mass m makes n revolutions per second around a circle of radius r. Okay, so we need to find out the kinetic energy of the object. Okay, so suppose this is the circle, right? So this is the circle of radius. Suppose the radius of the circle is r. Okay, and the object is moving around the circle, right? So that means the object is moving around the circle, and suppose the velocity of the object at this point is v theta. Okay, so that means what will be the kinetic energy of the object? The kinetic energy of the object will be half into m into v theta square. Okay, so we need to find out your v theta, right? To find out v theta, we'll be using this information that the object makes n revolutions per second. So the object is making n revolution per second. Okay, so that means in 1 second the particle is traveling how much distance? N revolution, right? N into 1 revolution, right? N into 1 revolution, right? So I can write in this manner. So the particles in 1 second, it is traveling how much distance? N into what is 1 revolution? 1 revolution is the entire length that is traveled by the particle. Okay, so that means this will be equal to your 2 pi r. Okay, so that means in 1 second, the particle is traveling how much? 2 pi rn distance, right? So that means in 1 second the particle is traveling 2 pi rn distance. Okay, v theta is nothing but the distance traveled by time. Okay, distance by time. Okay, so what is the distance traveled? 2 pi rn, and this 2 pi rn distance is traveled in 1 second, right? So that means v theta is nothing but your 2 pi rn. Okay, so that means for here the kinetic energy will be half into m into v theta. What is v theta? 2 pi rn, right? So this will be equal to 2 pi rn whole square. So this will be equal to your half m. So over here if I just expand this will be 4 pi square r square n square, right? So if I just expand again, so this will be equal to 2m pi square r square n square. Okay, so that means the correct option to your question number 22 will be option number C, 2 pi square m n square r square. Okay, so proceeding on to the next question, that is your question number 23. And satellite travels around the earth in a circular orbit. What is true about the forces acting in this situation? Okay, so suppose this is the earth. Okay, so suppose this is E, that is the earth. Okay, and suppose this is the trajectory of the satellite. So the satellite is traveling around the earth. Okay, and this is the trajectory of the satellite. So that means over here I can say that the satellite is at this position. Okay, so that means this is the satellite. Okay, and the satellite is moving around the orbit around the earth with a velocity v. Okay, so this is moving at a velocity v. Okay, so we have to keep in mind that the centripetal acceleration of the satellite is always towards the earth. Okay, so that means the acceleration of the satellite is always there, and that is the centripetal acceleration, which is equal to your v square by r, where r is the distance between the earth and the satellite. Okay, and the force that the earth exerts on the satellite is also in this direction, right? Which is the force due to the earth and the satellite, right? So over here see that the direction of the force between the earth and the satellite is in this direction. Okay, and the centripetal acceleration is also in the same direction. The centripetal acceleration is v square by r, and the force that is applied by the earth on the satellite is F. Suppose the force be F. They are acting in the same direction, right? So that means what is happening? So we can say that the resultant force is in the same direction as the satellite acceleration, right? So that means we can say that the resultant force that is applied by the earth on the satellite, that is this force, that is the F force, this is in the same direction to the centripetal acceleration, right? Which is equal to your v square by r. Right, so this is in the same direction. So the correct option to your question number 23 will be option number A. Okay, so let us explore the other options as well. The gravitational force acting on the satellite is negligible. No, we cannot neglect the gravitational force on the satellite. In fact, we say that the gravitational force on the satellite due to the earth is equal to G m1 m2 upon r square. Okay, so over here we can find that, so this is equal to G. What is m1? M1 is the mass of the earth. Okay, what is m2? M2 is the satellite, mass of the satellite, right? And what is r? The distance between the earth and the satellite. Okay, so this is equal to r squared. Okay, and this value cannot be ignored. Okay, so that means this option is incorrect. Okay, proceeding to the next option. There is no resultant force on the satellite relative to the earth. No, the earth provides a resultant force, F. See, this is the resultant force that the earth provides on the satellite. Okay, so that means there is a resultant force on the satellite that is provided by the earth. Okay, so that means this option is also incorrect. Okay, proceeding to the next option, the satellite does not exert any force on the earth. So this is also incorrect. Why? The force that is applied by the earth to the satellite, okay, by the earth to the satellite, so this is equal to your G me ms by r square. Okay, so the same gravitational force will be provided by the satellite to the earth, okay, which will be equal to your same G me ms by r square, right? So in fact, in a way, you can also say that the magnitude of the force by which the earth pulls the satellite to itself, the satellite also pulls the earth to itself with the same magnitude of force, right? So this is the basics of your gravitational force of attraction. See, when two bodies are placed close to each other, they will exert the same gravitational force on each other, right? So which will be equal to the same force, right? Which will be equal to your G m1 m2 by r square. Okay, so that means when two bodies are placed close to each other, they will exert same gravitational force on each other, right? The first body will give this force on the second body, and the second body will give this force on the first body, right? In this manner, the satellite is giving a force F on the earth. Similarly, the earth is pulling the satellite to itself with the same force, right? So that means the satellite does exist, okay, a force on the earth. So that means this option is also incorrect. So the correct option to your question number 23 will be option number 8. Next question, that is your question number 24. The energy levels for an atom are shown to scale. A photon of wavelength lambda is emitted because of the transition from E3 to E2. Okay, so an electron made a transition from your E3 to your E2, and corresponding to that a photon of wavelength lambda is emitted, right? So we know that delta E is equal to your h nu. Okay, now what is delta E? Delta E is the energy that is released when the electron makes a transition from your E3 energy state to your E2 energy state, right? So that means over here delta E is equal to your h nu, where nu is the frequency of the photon that is emitted. Okay, nu is the frequency. Okay, so the nu can be written as c by lambda. Okay, where c is the speed of light and lambda is the wavelength of the photon that is emitted. So delta E is nothing but your hc by lambda. Okay, so from here we get that lambda is equal to hc by delta E. See, over here hc is a constant. Okay, so from here I can write that lambda is actually inversely proportional to your delta E, right? So that means when delta E increases, what will happen to the wavelength of the photon that is emitted? Wavelength of the photon that is emitted will decrease, right? And when delta E decreases, what happens? The emitted photon will have a larger wavelength, right? So these are our two necessary conditions that you should keep in mind. Okay, now we need to find out which transition leads to the emission of the photon of a longer wavelength, right? So that means for a longer wavelength, what should happen? So for a longer wavelength, the energy difference should be less, right? And the wavelength should be longer than the transition from E3 to E2, right? So that means for longer wavelength, we need what? Shorter energy difference, right? So that means the energy difference between the two states should be shorter than your E3 to E2. Okay, so that means the energy difference should be shorter than E3 to E2. Okay, so let us check the options. E4 to E1. See, over here E4 to E1 the energy difference is much larger than E3 to E2, right? So that means this transition will emit a photon of very short wavelength compared to E3 to E2. Okay, so that means this is your incorrect option. Okay, now check E4 to E3. See, E4 to E3 is actually, the transition is actually smaller than E3 to E2, right? So when the transition is smaller, that means the energy difference is smaller. What will happen? It will emit a photon of larger wavelength compared to E3 to E2, right? So that means this is the correct option. Okay, so let us explore E3 to E1. See, E3 to E1, okay, this is E3 to E1. So this is also having a much larger energy difference compared to your E3 to E2, right? You can compare this, right? So when you compare this, E3 to E1 has a much larger energy difference than E3 to E2. So that means the transition from E3 to E1 will emit a photon of much smaller wavelength compared to E3 to E2. So this is incorrect. Now proceeding on to the last option, that is your option number D, E2 to E1. See, the energy difference between E2 to E1 is also much larger than energy difference between E3 and E2, right? So that means what is the case? So this transition will emit a photon of much smaller wavelength compared to E3 to E2. So this option will be also incorrect. So that correct option to your question number 24 will be option number B. A proton, an electron and an alpha particle are at rest. Okay, so we need to compare the smallest charge to mass ratio to the largest charge to mass ratio. Okay, so the charge to mass ratio, so that means it can be written as Q by M. Okay, so we are taking the charge to mass ratio of, we are comparing of one proton, the second is your electron, and the third is your alpha particle. Okay, so over here let me write this as alpha particle. Okay, so what is the charge of the proton? The charge of the proton is E. Okay, so 1 unit of charge. Okay, so what is the mass of the proton? So this will be equal to m of p. The subscript p means it is the mass of the proton. Okay, so what is the charge of the electron? The charge of the electron is E, right? 1 unit of charge again. Okay, so over here you need to keep in mind that the mass of the electron is actually 2000 times less than the mass of the proton. Okay, so that means the mass of the proton when divided by your 2000 will get the mass of the electron. So over here just let me substitute, in place of Me I am substituting this. Okay, so over here this will be mass of the proton divided by your 2000, right? Now what will happen? The 2000 will go up, right? Basic arithmetic. So this will be 2000 times of E by mass of proton. We got the charge per unit mass of proton and electron. Okay, now we need to find out for an alpha particle. Okay, so we know that for an alpha particle the charge will be 2 units. So that means the charge will be for an alpha particle the charge will be 2 units. So this will be 2E divided by mass of the alpha particle. Okay, so mass of the alpha particle is actually 4 times the mass of the proton. Okay, so over here if I just substitute, in place of m alpha, that is the mass of the alpha particle, I am substituting 4 times the mass of proton. Okay, so now over here what will be Q by M finally? So for proton we have E by mass of proton. For electron we have 2000 times of E by mass of proton, and for alpha particle we have 1/2 E by mass of proton. Okay, so that means the smallest charge to ratio is this alpha particle, right? Because 1/2, over here 1/2 can be written as 0.5. okay, and over here this can be written as 1. So that means the smallest charge to mass ratio will be of alpha particle, right, and the largest charge to mass ratio will be of electron. Okay, so proceeding on to the next question, that is your question number 26. X is a radioactive nuclide that decays to a stable nuclide. Okay, the activity X falls to 1/16th of its original value in 32 seconds. Okay, so that means we know that activity at a time t is equal to activity at the initial instant into e to the power minus of your lambda times of t. Okay, so from here I can write that a at a time t, that is activity at a time t, is equal to activity that is the initial into e to the power minus of lambda t. Okay, so over here it states that the activity falls 1/16th of its original value. Okay, original value, that means the initial value was, what was the initial value? A naught. So it falls to 1/16th of its original value. So a at a time t will be 1/16th of the original value, that is a naught by 16. So this is equal to a naught into e to the power minus of lambda times of t. So when does the activity falls to 1/16th of its original value? At t equal to your 32 seconds, right? So in place of t I am writing 32. So over here I can see that 1/16 it becomes e to the power minus of 32 lambda. Okay, now take ln on both sides. So ln 1/16, so this is equal to your ln e to the power minus of 32 lambda. Okay, so from here I can see that ln, so 1/16 can be written as 16 inverse. So this can be also written as ln e to the power minus of 32 lambda. Okay, so what is 16 inverse? So minus of ln 16. Okay, so this is equal to minus of 32 lambda ln e. What is ln e? 1, right? So that means minus of ln 16, so this is equal to minus of your 32 lambda. So from here lambda comes out to be how much? ln 16 by 32. Okay, so we also know that 16 can be written as 2 to the power 4, right? When you raise 2 to the power 4 we get 16. So 4 comes out now, log property. So this is equal to your 4 ln 2 divided by your 32. So that means from here lambda comes out to be how much? It comes out to be ln 2 by 8. Okay, so now we need to find out the half-life. So we know that t half. So now we need to find out the half-life. So we know that t half is equal to your ln 2 by lambda. Okay, what is lambda? Lambda is ln 2 by 8. So ln 2 divided by ln 2 by 8. Okay, so that means t half is equal to 8 ln 2 by ln 2. So that means the t half is nothing but 8. So that means the half-life, so that means the half-life of x will be 8. So that means the half-life of x will be 8. So that means the correct, that is your question number 27. What is correct about the nature and range of the strong interaction between the nuclear particles? Okay, so we know that strong interaction between the nuclear particles happen at very small distances. Okay, so that means the distance between the two nuclear particles should be in between 0.7 femtometer to 3 femtometers. So that means when there is a very small distance between the two nuclear particles, that is between 0.7 femtometer to 3 femtometer, what will happen? Strong interaction between the nuclear particles will take place. Okay, and they will be attractive. Okay, this strong interaction will be attractive. Okay, so that means over here exploring option number A, it is attractive at all separations. No, it is attractive only at small separations. Okay, now exploring option number B, it is attractive for particles between separations 0.7 femtometer and 3 femtometer. Yeah, so this falls in the definition of strong interaction between nuclear particles. So this option is correct. Okay, so that means the correct option to your question number 27 will be option number B. Now proceeding on to the next question, that is your question number 28. We need to find out the units of specific energy and energy density. Okay, so that means specific energy is what? Energy per unit mass. Okay, what is the unit of energy? Joule. What is the unit of mass? Kg. Okay, so that means the unit of specific energy is joule kg inverse. Okay, now for energy density, we know that what is energy density? Energy per unit volume. Okay, what is the unit of energy? Joule. Okay, what is the unit of volume? Meter cube. So that means the unit of energy per unit volume or energy density is joule per meter cube, that is joule meter minus 3. So that means the correct option to your question number 28 will be option number B. Now proceeding on to the next question, that is your question number 29. What is the function of the moderator in a thermal nuclear fission reactor? So we know that the moderator helps slow down the neutrons that is produced by fission to sustain the chain reaction, right? So that means what is the function of the moderator? So that means what is the function of the moderator? To decrease the kinetic energy of the neutrons emitted from the fission reactions, right? So that means the correct option to your question number 29 will be option number. Proceeding on to the question number 30. What is meant by the statement that average albedo of the moon is 0.1? So we know that the definition of albedo, that is alpha, is equal to the total reflected radiation divided by your total incoming radiation. Okay, total incoming radiation. Okay, and the albedo in this question is given to be how much? 0.1. Okay, so that means 0.1 means how much? 10%. Okay, so that means 10% of the, so that means 10% is equal to the total reflected divided by the total incoming. Okay, so that means what is happening? The total reflected will be equal to your 10% of the total incoming, 10% of the incoming radiation, right? So that means 10% of the incoming radiation will be reflected by the moon. Okay, so that means the correct option to your question number 30 will be option number C.